Right now, the fight to sway control of Congress takes dramatic new turns just weeks after Democrats declared victory in Virginia.
The law is with us in Virginia, the facts are with us in Virginia, and the people are with us in Virginia. There's no basis in law or fact for the Virginia Supreme Court, under the Constitution that exists, particularly in the aftermath of a people-approved referendum, to do anything other than to allow it to move forward.
The law is with us, said the aspiring House Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries. Not so fast, says the Virginia Supreme Court. Today, they struck down the map that voters approved last month, a map that would have eliminated 4 seats currently held by Republicans. In a new interview with CNN, Jeffries is vowing to flip at least 2 of those seats, saying, quote, "The fight's not over in Virginia. We're just getting started."
A private phone call just leaked, and it completely blows up the idea that Democrats are feeling good about their chances right now. Hakeem Jeffries sat down with CNN only a few days ago to claim his party is calm, confident, and ready to win back the House. But when the cameras were off, the conversation took a much darker turn. Democratic leaders were caught discussing a plan to force an entire state Supreme Court off the bench just so they could get their favorite congressional map back in place. If they really believe a blue wave is coming, you have to wonder why they feel the need to go to such extreme lengths. To understand why this plan even exists, you have to look at how redistricting works, because this is where elections are actually won or lost before a single person even walks into a voting booth. Every 10 years, right after the census, states have to redraw their congressional district lines. These lines decide which neighborhoods get grouped together and which party those people are likely to send to Washington. It isn't exactly a glamorous topic, but it is the most direct way for a party to lock in political power for a full decade. Both sides know that whoever holds the pen when the map is drawn basically controls the outcome of the election. Virginia became the center of this battle very recently. Democrats pushed for a new congressional map and decided to put it in front of voters as a referendum. After the voters gave it the green light, Jeffries went on television and claimed the law, the facts, and the people were all on their side in Virginia. He was using those exact words to tell the public that their map was untouchable. But then the Virginia Supreme Court stepped in and struck the whole thing down. And this was a massive blow because that Pacific map would have wiped out 4 seats currently held by Republicans. The court has the power to do this because of a very simple legal rule. Even if voters approve something, that decision is still invalid if the people running the show didn't follow the constitutional rules to get there. You could think of it like a property dispute between neighbors. If you and the guy next door sign a paper to move your fence line, that agreement won't hold up in court if you never filed the right paperwork with the county. The signatures were real and you both agreed to it, but because the legal process was broken, the whole deal falls apart. The logic the court used actually started with a smaller ruling out of Tazewell County. A judge there found that the effort to redraw these maps was invalid because county officials forgot to post public notices at courthouses at least 90 days before the election. Virginia law is very specific about those 90 days. And since nobody put up the posters, the entire amendment process was legally broken from the start. The Virginia Supreme Court took that same reasoning and used it to toss out the map that voters thought was a done deal. And this is where things get interesting because Democrats aren't just walking away. They want to take to that Tazewell County logic and use it to argue that the independent commission Virginia created back in 2020 was also never properly announced. If they can prove that commission never legally existed, the power to draw the maps goes right back to the state legislature. Since Democrats currently control the Virginia General Assembly, they will get to draw the lines however they want. That is the only first step of the plan. And the second step is something we have almost never seen in modern American politics, right? But before we get to that, I want you guys to check out this next clip.
The polling indicates the likelihood that Democrats will take the House in November. History suggests the likelihood that that'll happen. Are you a little worried that this nutty, out of control gerrymandering actually compromises that possibility?
No, we're going to win back the House of Representatives in November. We are only 3 seats short. We historically overperformed in November, and that's one of the reasons why Republicans are in panic mode. Remember, Ali, when we took the House back in 2018, we were 24 seats short. We crossed over that hurdle, and in fact, in 2018, we flipped a total of 40 seats. So we're going to take back control of the House of Representatives. We're going to continue to make clear to the American people that we will lower their high cost of living, fix a broken healthcare system, and clean up the corruption that we're seeing in the country, in the Congress, certainly with the Supreme Court, and deal with the most corrupt administration in American history. Now, we're going to need nationwide judicial reform. We're going to need nationwide electoral reform. We're going to need nationwide campaign finance reform, which is why we have to take the House back, take the Senate back, keep pressing forward, and then in 2028, take the presidency back as well.
And family, before we go to this next segment about the most, almost never seen in modern American politics thing, I want to make sure you guys understand what I mean by when basically taking that Tazewell County logic and use it to argue the independent commission Virginia created back in 2020. Basically, when I said that the Virginia Supreme Court took the reasoning of them not following the legal process correctly for the 2026 redistricting map that the Supreme Court struck down in Virginia Supreme Court, basically Democrats are trying to say, okay, well, if this 2026 proposed map is wrong, then the map back in 2020 was also unconstitutional. So if the 2026 redistricting amendment got thrown out because the process was legally flawed, then maybe the 2020 amendment that created the commission was also legally flawed. The Democrats are trying to take that angle. And if that 2020 commission was never valid, then the current redistricting setup should not control anymore. So basically they're trying to say 2020 was wrong, and since 2026 got struck down by Virginia Supreme Court, they didn't like. They're basically trying to say, let's start from scratch. Now, as you guys see on the screen here, I want you guys to see very clearly, as it says, on a private call this past Saturday, Hakeem Jeffries sat down with Democratic House members from Virginia to talk through what just happened with the court ruling. 3 people who were on that call confirmed the details to reporters, and 2 more people who were briefed on it afterward backed up the same account. So this isn't just a rumor somebody floated online. Multiple sources with direct knowledge confirmed what was discussed, and the lawmakers spent time venting about the court laws before talking about their determination to flip 2 or 3 Republican-held seats under their existing map. That conversation eventually shifted into something that went well beyond standard political strategy, as they discussed what participants described as a bank shot proposal. This was a 2-step plan to get their preferred map reinstated by going around the court entirely. The first step uses the Tazewell County ruling we just covered as its foundation, right? Simply, the Democrats want to argue that if the 2026 amendment effort was invalid because of improper public notice, then the same logic should apply to the 2020 maps that was created with Virginia's independent redistricting commission in the first place. And their argument would be that the courthouses across the state never properly posted notice of that amendment either. So they want to hold the courts accountable for doing wrong, and they basically trying to justify starting from scratch and making a map that they want to create, which would mean the commission was never validly created under Virginia law. And if a court accepts that argument, the commission disappears on paper, and the authority to draw congressional maps falls directly to whoever controls the state legislature. Right now, Democrats control both chambers of the Virginia General Assembly, which means step 1 is essentially a legal argument designed to hand themselves the pen. Step 2 is where this plan moves into generally uncharted territory to make sure the plan actually holds up. Democrats discussed having the General Assembly lower the mandatory retirement age for Virginia Supreme Court justices from 75 down to 44. That specific number is the age of the youngest justice currently sitting on that court. So lowering it to 44 or below forces every single sitting justice off the bench at the same time. The entire court retires in one move. And since Virginia judges aren't elected by the public, they are appointed by the General Assembly instead. This means Democrats could fill every vacancy on the court with lawyers who are aligned with their position on the maps, and a brand new court chosen by Democrats in Virginia would then be the one ruling on whether the redistricting commission was ever valid to begin with. Think about what that means in practical terms. You lose a game, and then you use a procedural argument to question whether the referees were ever officially certified. Then you pass a rule that forces every referee to retire, and you hire new referees who already agree with your side before restarting the game with those new referees making the calls. That's the sequence being described here in this article from New York Times. And while every single step is technically legal in isolation, the combination of them is a different thing entirely. It is a strategy aimed at a Pacific court ruling that went the wrong way. The life lesson I want to apply here, or that's worth applying here, is a simple one. When someone is willing to change the rules the moment those rules produce an outcome they didn't want, you're not watching someone who believes in the rules, you're watching someone who only believes in winning. Power. Rules to that kind of person are useful when they work in their favor and negotiable when they don't. If they're willing to operate that way, when they're out of power and under pressure, it's worth asking seriously what that same approach looks like when there's nobody left to push back. So now let's get into the article. Now that I technically broke it down, but I want to read it with you guys. So, citing my sources, and you guys can see New York Times at the top. So it says, a private call reveals Democrats' desperation over tossing of map. A conversation involving House members from Virginia and a top House Democrat reflected the fury and desperation that has gripped the party after Friday's ruling in the state. Democrats are struggling to respond to a major redistricting setback in Virginia, with some party leaders discussing an audacious and possibly far-fetched idea for trying to restore a congressional map voided by the court, but showing little indication they have a clear plan. During a private discussion on Saturday that included Democratic House members from Virginia and Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the minority leader, the lawmakers vented anger at their defeat at the Virginia Supreme Court, spoke about a collective determination to flip 2 or 3 Republican-held seats under the existing map, and discussed a bank shot proposal, which I told you guys about, to redraw the congressional lines anyway, according to 3 people who participated in the call and 2 others who were briefed on it. They did not land on a specific course forward, and Mr. Jeffries and the other members of Congress agreed to consult with their lawyers about the most prudent way to proceed, said the people who spoke on the condition of autonomy to describe a private talk. The conversation reflected the desperation and fury that have gripped the party after the state Supreme Court struck down a favorable map that had been ratified by voters. The most dramatic idea they discussed, which would involve an unusual gambit to replace the entire state Supreme Court with a goal of reinstating their gerrymandered map, drew mixed reactions on the call, said the people, and it was not clear that it would even be viable or palatable to Governor Abigail Spanberger and Democrats in the Virginia General Assembly. After Democrats have fought Republicans to a rough draw last month in a nationwide gerrymandering war, a pair of recent court rulings quickly gave the GOP the clear upper hand in the race to redraw maps ahead of the midterm elections. Facing stiff headwinds, including President Trump's low approval ratings and high gas prices, Republicans are looking for every advantage they can find to defy the odds and hold on to their narrow majority. All right. Any plans to enact a new congressional map for this year's midterm elections will require action in the next few days. In a court filing last month, Stephen Koski, the commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections, said any changes to the maps after Tuesday, May 12th, will significantly increase the risk, quote unquote, of his agency being unable to properly prepare for the state's scheduled August 4th primary election. A spokesperson for Mr. Jeffries declined to comment. Scott Servell, the majority leader of the Virginia Senate, declined to comment on Saturday evening. Don Scott, the Speaker of the State House of Delegates, said in an interview that he had not spoken to Mr. Jeffries or members of the congressional delegation about the multi-step proposal that came up in the discussion. So, one key to the plan would be having Democrats in Richmond lower their mandatory retirement age for state Supreme Court justices, an idea that began circulating among state lawmakers and members of Congress after a column proposing a version of the idea was published on Friday night in the Down Ballot, a progressive newsletter. Ms. Spanberger would have to sign off on any legislation that lowered the judicial retirement age. She has not been briefed on the proposal. The people involved in the discussion or briefed on it said. Her spokeswoman, Libby Wyatt, declined to comment. The first step in the process, as discussed on the delegation's call, would be to invoke a January ruling by a circuit court judge in Tazewell County, Virginia, that said the 2026 constitutional amendment effort to redraw the maps was invalid because county officials did not post notice of it at courthouses and other public locations 3 months before a general election. I broke that down to you guys. I'm just reading the article so you guys, know where I'm getting it from and citing my source. Democrats would aim to use that ruling to seek to invalidate the earlier constitutional amendment that created the state's independent redistricting commission by arguing that the courthouses across the state did not post notice of it at the time. That would give the legislature the authority to enact a map of its choosing. Ensuring the plan proceeds would involve the General Assembly, which is controlled by Democrats, lowering the mandatory retirement age for Virginia's Supreme Court from 75 to 54, the age of the youngest current justice or less. Virginia judges are appointed by the General Assembly, where Democrats hold majorities in both chambers and could then fill vacancies on the court with sympathetic Democratic lawyers. So there you have it, folks. Now you guys know what I was talking about, even though I broke it down simply to make sure you understand. And this is where the receipts really start to pile up, because this plan doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists right alongside years of very loud, very public statements from these same leaders about what it means to respect the judiciary, right? When you put those statements next to what was discussed on that private call, the contradiction is hard to look past. During the Trump years, every time a federal court ruled against the administration, Democratic leaders lined up to remind the country that an independent judiciary is one of the most important pillars of a functioning democracy. I figure I'll remind you guys because Hakeem Jeffries posted this on X, and it says, here's a thought for the so-called president. Independent judiciary is a hallmark of our democracy. That was February 5th, 2017 here. From Hakeem Jeffries himself. All right, family? From Hakeem Jeffries himself. So, with that being said, as we're having a conversation, any suggestion that a court ruling should be questioned, worked around, or ignored was treated as an attack on democracy itself. The message was consistent and clear, and it told us that you don't get to dismiss a court because you disagree with its decisions. That's not how a constitutional republic works. Hakeem Jeffries said that, right? Hakeem Jeffries said this in 2017. Hakeem Jeffries said the Virginia Supreme Court had no basis in law or fact to strike down the map. Currently in 2026 that they tried to push through. And he said it publicly on camera before the ruling even came down. Now his party is privately discussing how to clear the same court off the bench entirely. And Cory Booker went on CNN and called the Supreme Court corrupt. But don't take my word for it, family. I want you guys to check it out.
I wonder what you make of some of the messaging we've heard. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries had very strong words for the Supreme Court, calling it, quote, illegitimate, and accusing the court of trying to suppress the vote and rig the midterm elections and beyond. Do you agree that the Supreme Court is illegitimate and actually trying to rig U.S. elections, or do you think that language goes too far?
I think the Supreme Court is wrong. I think they've been making decisions to strip rights from Americans, whether it's stripping rights for reproductive rights from Americans, whether whether it's stripping voting rights for Americans, this court is setting us back. And we have to understand that this is one of those moments where what the Supreme Court is doing is making a decision, but the people have the last word. This is not the end of this story. We have seen setbacks before. The question is this the time for people to understand that this is not left or right, it is right or wrong? Is it going to spark another movement? And so most important right now is people to understand we are not helpless. 6 people cannot determine 300 plus million. We have to.
Sorry, fam, we're not CNN. NBC, Meet the Press. However, Cory Booker here, which we'll get to another clip in a minute, he called the Supreme Court corrupt, and he claimed it has a corrupt shadow hanging over it while pushing for term limits on justices. Ask yourself a straight question. Would he be saying any of that if the court had been handing down decisions he agreed with? If the court was made up entirely of justices like Ketanji Brown Jackson, it is unlikely Booker would be on television calling for term limits and reform. The answer tells you everything you need to know about whether this is actually about principle or whether it's about outcomes, is my point here. When your preferred side wins, the institution is legitimate. But when it doesn't, the institution is suddenly broken and in desperate need of reform. The term limits point is worth holding on to for a second because it reveals something almost uncomfortable in its irony. Booker has been in the Senate since 2013, so he's not a freshman, but rather a senior member of a legislative body that has members who have served for 30 and 40 years. Congress has no term limit. Sorry, family. And the same people calling for term limits on federal judges have not authored legislation to term limit themselves out of the seats they held for decades. That's not a minor inconsistency, it's a pattern, and it suggests that term limits are a good idea only when they apply to someone else. This is what political scientists sometimes call situational constitutionalism, which is a fancy way of saying the rules only matter when they produce the right outcome for you. It's not unique to one party, but right now the people being loudest about protecting democracy are simultaneously discussing the mechanics of forcing an entire state Supreme Court off the bench because it got in the way of their preferred map. You can't hold both positions honestly at the same time. History has seen this before. In 1937, Franklin D. Roosevelt tried to add 6 additional justices to the U.S. Supreme Court after it struck down pieces of his New Deal legislation. Members of his own party openly called it a power grab, and the Senate eventually voted it down 70-20. The reason it failed wasn't because Republicans stopped it, but because enough people in both parties understood that once you start reshaping courts to produce outcomes you want, you fundamentally change what courts are for. That precedent held for almost 90 years. And what's being discussed in Virginia right now is the same idea with different paperwork. Now let's check out what Cory Booker had to say.
Well, you take me to my next question, because this decision has revived the debate within the Democratic Party about potentially adding more seats to the Supreme Court. Would you, Senator, support an effort to add more seats to the Supreme Court, to expand the court?
Well, remember, there's a corrupt shadow hanging over the Supreme Court. Some of these same members that are voting on decisions like this are accepting gifts from billionaires. We have RVs, lavish vacations. It's a corrupt court. The highest court in our land has the lowest ethics laws. Number 2 is that the Supreme Court clearly within our power. I lead one of these pieces of legislation with Senator Whitehouse and others to give term limits to Supreme Court members. That could go a long way in curing this. The Supreme Court desperately needs reform. It is a corrupt court. And in my opinion, it is a court that needs reform, and I will continue to lead on those things.
Well, you take me to...
There you have it, family. I told you he said corrupt. It wasn't in the first clip, but it was in the second. So mainstream media outlets aren't asking the obvious question loudly enough. So we should probably just say it. If the Democratic Party is actually the favorite to win the midterms in 2026, why does any of this feel so necessary? Polling has consistently shown that people are tired of Trump, and history tells us the party out of power almost always picks up seats during the midterm cycle. Hakeem Jeffries, right? He talked about recently flipping seats with the total confidence of a man who already knows how the story ends. But that public swagger doesn't match what happened on a private call that same weekend, where those same leaders were mapping out a two-step plan to force an entire court off the bench. Confident teams don't usually try to move the goalposts before the game even starts because they know they could just show up and win on a fair field. So this leak call, right, gives us a look at something no public poll is going to show you right now within this leak call, as you guys can see here. Deep down, the Democratic leadership doesn't actually believe that being not Trump is enough to carry them through 2026. And that is the real signal buried under all of the noise. And when a team starts hunting for structural advantages before the vote is even cast, they aren't acting out of strength, they're acting out of pure fear. And that kind of panicked decision making at the top usually leads to the exact brand of reckless thinking we are seeing in Virginia today. The party's current approval numbers point to a much bigger problem that goes way beyond simple messaging or clever spin. Voters who feel like the Democratic Party has stopped caring about their daily lives aren't going to be won over by some complicated redistricting maneuver. Redrawing a congressional map doesn't make eggs cheaper at the grocery store, as they would say. It doesn't fix healthcare system that feels broken. And it certainly doesn't speak to the working class families in Virginia who have been walking away from the party for years. This plan reveals that leadership has decided geography is more reliable than persuasion, meaning they would rather group the right voters together than actually try to change anyone's mind. They are putting their money on the map instead of the message, which tells you everything you need to know about how they really feel. We can see a direct line from this strategy back to the Biden situation in 2024. Democratic voters never actually got a real primary process where different candidates had to make their case and let the people decide. Right? When Kamala Harris started running, when unfortunately we found out that Joe Biden wasn't capable of running. Instead, the party leadership picked a nominee behind closed doors, and the primary was basically over before it even began. Back then, the excuse was that a competitive race would be too messy or damaging for the party as well. What that actually told millions of voters was their opinion was just a formality rather than a real choice. The result was already decided, it seemed to people, and the process only existed to rubber stamp it, which is the exact same logic we see in Virginia right now. The map is the only outcome they care about, so the process becomes something to be manipulated rather than something to be respected. This isn't just about politics, because it's a principle that applies to any organization, from a massive corporation to a local sports team or even a family. When the people in charge start making convenient exceptions to the rules they created, it's rarely just about one specific event. It is a massive red flag that they have stopped trusting the process to give them the results they want. When leadership loses faith in the process, what they are really saying is that they don't trust the people the process is supposed to serve. That is the warning we should all be paying attention to, regardless of which side we vote for. Because once that mindset takes over, the rules just became whatever the people in power need them to be on any given Tuesday. What is happening in Virginia isn't some isolated local story, but rather a preview of what's coming next. This is a test case to see if a state legislator can use boring procedural arguments to tear down constitutional amendments and force judges into retirement. If they can replace an entire court with friendly appointees just because they didn't like one specific ruling, then the floodgates are open. If this sequence of events works in Virginia, it won't stay there for long. Every state with a Democratic legislator in a court that makes inconvenient rulings will suddenly have a perfect step-by-step manual sitting right in front of them. The tools they are talking about using are already sitting on the shelves in dozens of other states. Most legislative bodies across the country have the power to set retirement ages for judges, and constitutional amendments can almost always be challenged if someone finds a tiny mistake in how the public notice was handled. Even the independent redistricting commissions that people fought for were created through amendment processes that could be picked apart using the same logic Democrats are testing in Virginia. None of this requires passing brand new laws, but it does require a willingness to use old tools in ways that were never meant to be used. Once one state proves that the political will is there, the hesitation that kept other states from crossing that line is going to disappear very quickly. There are three main levers that decide who wins an election before a single campaign ad even hits the airwaves, and those are redistricting, who sits on the court, and the electoral rules. Virginia has given us a front row seat to a coordinated attempt to grab all three of those levers at the exact same time. First, you draw the map in the legislature, then you clear it out. You clear out the court that might stop you, and finally, you fill those seats with judges who will approve the new rules. If you can control all three of those things at once, you aren't really competing in an election anymore. You are designing an outcome. That is a permanent structural shift in how the government works. And those kinds of changes are almost impossible to reverse once they are locked in. This is the exact reason why state level politics deserves way more attention than the presidential races that dominate the news. Federal elections get all the cameras and the nonstop coverage, but the decisions that actually limit your choices on a ballot are happening in state capitals and quiet circuit courts. These fights take place in county offices most people couldn't find on a map, and in procedural filings that nobody bothers to read until someone needs a reason to throw out an election result. The boring, dusty machinery of democracy is where the real power lies, and right now people are poking at that machinery to find every single vulnerability they can exploit in real time. The most honest takeaway here has nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican. Any institution that starts treating its own rules like they are negotiable, the moment things get difficult, is telling you exactly who they are. The rules are either real or they are meaningless, and there's no middle ground. The people who actually lose when these institutions stop standing by their word aren't the politicians in the high back chairs. The losers are the voters who showed up, did their research, and trusted that the system was going to run by good faith or being run in good faith. And the evidence is right there, an elite call and a two-step plan to the next 2 years of very loud public statements that reversed direction the moment a court ruling didn't go the right way. None of this requires you to pick a side politically to see what's actually happening. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican to recognize that changing the referees in the middle of the game because you didn't like the last call is a problem, regardless of who's doing it. That's not a partisan statement. It's just common sense. And it applies equally no matter which party is holding the pen. The unbiased takeaway here is straightforward. Institutions only work when the people inside them agree to be bound by the same rules, whether they win or lose. The moment that agreement breaks down, it isn't just one party that pays the price. Every voter from every background ends up with less reliable representation because the system starts bending towards whoever has the most leverage at any given moment. That's the real cost of all of this. And it lands on regular people, not on the politicians debating it on private phone calls. The common sense solution isn't complicated either. Pay attention to state level races because that's where the decisions actually get made. The people who set judicial retirement ages, who control legislative chambers, and who appoint judges to fill vacancies aren't usually the names you see on the front page. They are the local representatives and state senators most people couldn't pick out of a lineup. If voters in every state held these officials to the same standard they hold federal candidates, a lot of what we discussed today would never make it past a conversation. The answer to institutional instability isn't rage, it's engagement at the level where the real decisions happen. Form your opinion, is my takeaway and my point of this, on what side you stand on, but stay informed, stay involved, and hold everyone in that building accountable to the same standard. That's my takeaway with all of this. Drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to hear from you and where you land on this one, and make sure you subscribe so you catch the next breakdown. I try to be objective as possible. I'm not worrying about Democrat or Republican. I'm just informing you guys. I gave you the solution but I also told you guys to form your own opinion. As always, we just having a conversation because I can't tell you how to think, what to think, but I could just have a productive conversation based on the news that is being released. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. I'll catch you in the next one, family. On that note, peace.